Alright, so I've been meaning to tackle this subject for a long time, regarding the Star Wars Prequel Trilogy. Now for starters, save yourself the trouble of rebutting anything I say with, "Watch Red Letter Media," or "Mr. Plinkett's Review." Trust me, I've seen them, they're worthless, and if Star Wars means anything to you at all, you could do a better job than they did of coming up with solid objections to the prequels. I've got no problem whatsoever with people disliking the prequels. That's your right. But if you want to comment below on why you hate the prequels, I implore you, don't be that guy. Don't hide behind Red Letter Media. Okay, with that out of the way, as you know, there's a very vocal segment of fandom, as I'm sure we're all aware, that outright loathe and revile these films, as if they're the worst things on God's good earth, going so far as to despise George Lucas and publicly denounce him. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with every choice he's made, and there are things in the special editions I would love to remove, though that's a subject for another time. But the fact is, George Lucas doesn't deserve the ridicule he's received by many so-called fans. Many would love to paint him as a talentless hack who got lucky in spite of himself, and that the great accomplishments of the original trilogy are a result of the work of others, including Irvin Kershner, Lawrence Kasdan, and Gary Kurtz. It's a strange fandom Star Wars has, where a large segment seems to have turned on their benefactor and believe they can actually run Star Wars better than its creator. I'm not sure history has ever seen the like before, where fans have wanted a creation wrested from its creator's hands. But the sad fact many of these Lucas revilers have to face is that Star Wars is a creation of Lucas. It's his baby, and frankly, he should have the complete say over what's done with it. He had every right to make the prequels his way, whether it was right or wrong, whether you like it or dislike it. The artist has the right to make the art as it speaks to him or her. Public opinion should not weigh too heavily on his mind, lest he become a slave to his audience and cease to create art, but work for hire. It was generally public opinion turning on him that caused Lucas to sell Star Wars to Disney. You can't blame him for obviously not wanting to take the critical abuse anymore, and rather than continue to swim against the tide in his golden years, he gave it up completely. And as could be expected, Episode 7, The Force Awakens, turned out to be an experiment in corporate filmmaking. Now I don't despise The Force Awakens as prequel haters tend to despise Episodes 1 through 3, but obviously the film was designed to appeal to fan nostalgia first and foremost, foregoing any type of progression by taking the saga backwards to the same iconic images and using literally the exact same story beats from A New Hope. Ironically, even Rogue One had more inventive-looking new ships, aliens, and the like for the conflict, despite being a prequel. Let's take my least favorite movie in the saga, Attack of the Clones. Now, even though I admit the movie failed to impress me, I can appreciate the fact that Lucas failed to impress me while doing something different. The prequels didn't just take the easy way out by taking an already existing story in the franchise, slapping the modern coat of paint on it, and releasing it as a new chapter. Having created the Star Wars universe, who knows how it works better than George Lucas? And without him having even a perfunctory role in keeping the continuity in order and things regarding the uses of the Force and so forth, as it was originally announced that he'd do, The Force Awakens already began to stray from the reservation of continuity with new and improved Force powers displayed by Kylo Ren. Now, we may never know if Lucas' version of Episode 7 would have been better or worse, but it likely would have looked very different. I suppose my dissatisfaction with The Force Awakens is ironically the same problem prequel bashers have with the prequels. A lot of anti-prequel fans had a particular version of what would happen and how. It typically boils down to their version of Anakin, who would probably be played by Vin Diesel, turning to the dark side by the end of the first movie. Ultimately, force-choking Jedi left and right through the second prequel, until being stopped by Obi-Wan and having the third movie show the Jedi purge, with Vader now in full costume for the entire movie. Instead, what we got was pretty much what I wanted from the prequels, the rise and fall of a Force-sensitive boy who becomes a man, finds love, and ultimately becomes a Jedi Knight before falling to the dark side. A hero's journey that parallels Luke's journey, but with a mirrored outcome. Some of the execution was off and not what I expected, or even wanted in some cases, but I got pretty much what I expected. And I was ultimately very pleased with the prequels. I think it's fair to say others who had other expectations were bound to not have those expectations lived up to. Now, in the case of Episode 7, I'll admit the same rules apply. Your level of appreciation of the film is going to be strictly in line with your expectation. Many people who grew up with the prequels obviously aren't hung up by the same preconceived notions of longtime fans. As an OG fan myself, I can safely say that as a kid, if you'd told me Episode 7 would center around a bumbling former stormtrooper, a disappearing and reappearing X-Wing pilot, a female desert waif, the Empire 2.0, Han Solo separated from Princess Leia, back in the smuggling racket well into his 70s, mere cameos of C-3PO and R2-D2, and no Luke Skywalker, I'd probably have hit you with my strangely yellow-colored toy lightsaber. And yet the fandom at large seems to be accepting of this without any conflict with preconceived ideas. There really isn't a whole lot that we could determine the sequel trilogy would be about. The only solid things we could glean from Return of the Jedi is that Luke would pass on his teachings to a new generation of Jedi, something that conveniently happens off-screen in The Force Awakens. Leia would become a Jedi in some capacity, which doesn't really seem to happen either, and presumably a new dark side user would be the new threat to the galaxy. So it's interesting to see to what extent preconceived notions come into play. Does The Force Awakens really fit the bill for what many of you hoped for in an Episode 7? Or is it really only better because George Lucas was largely uninvolved? In fairness, people change as they get older. When creative people change, it's going to be reflected in their work. Pretty much the same people bemoaning the prequels bemoan Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for it not being exactly what they wanted, where not only Lucas is faulted for ruining a childhood favorite, but Steven Spielberg as well. It's not quite the same example, but the result is the same. Unforgiving fans willing to toss the baby out with the bathwater, dismissing the good with the bad. So in conclusion, I think the hate directed at the prequels and George Lucas are way overblown by some. And I have to say to those people, and you know who you are, Lucas didn't ruin your childhood, Lucas didn't run over your dog, Lucas didn't run away with your wife. Lucas made a movie that you didn't like. George Lucas doesn't owe you anything. He didn't owe you the movie that you had in your head for 25 years. He made the films that he wanted to make, as was his right as Star Wars creator. This is Johnnie Torch stepping down from my soapbox and reminding you, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.